When Bill and his brothers were at their closest, they said that if Bill's bride in the future wasn't me, they would definitely not attend his wedding. Later, Bill got married, and the bride wasn't me. True to their word, his brothers didn't attend Bill's wedding. After the wedding, Bill questioned them. The one who had always disliked me punched Bill in the face, his eyes bloodshot. Bill, those who betray true love deserve to die the most. But why was it Eve who died? Chapter 1. The day I died, Bill officially announced the date of his wedding with Flora. Other than the three who were close to Bill, everyone else sent their blessings. The banquet hall was crowded with guests, and the floor was covered in romantic red roses, stretching from the entrance to the entire stage backdrop. Even more extravagant than when Bill and I were engaged. Flora, holding Bill's arm, looked a bit aggrieved. "Bill, where are those brothers of yours? Do they dislike me? They didn't even come on such an important day." Bill glanced at his watch and made call after call. None of the calls got through, but many harassing calls came in. Bill frowned as he blocked each one. Flora's face was hard to read. Since she appeared by Bill's side, his three good brothers had always been indifferent to her. She thought they would attend on a day like this. After all, they had been close to Bill for over 10 years. I followed Bill, my gaze wandering over Flora. How foolish I must have been not to notice the abnormalities Flora displayed since the day she showed up. Flora bit her lip, holding her phone behind her back. The screen was still on our chat interface. "Eve, so what if it's been 10 years? In 7 days, it'll be my wedding with Bill. Do you dare to come?" I narrowed my eyes as my soul passed through her body. I really wanted to reply, "I dare to come. Do you dare to see me?" But I'm dead. Chapter 2. The banquet ended. Strangely, Bill didn't take Flora home. Instead, he dropped her off at her own apartment. In the car, Flora grabbed Bill's collar and brought her lips close to his. "Flora, I had a drink." "Be good, don't you dislike the taste of alcohol?" Bill pushed Flora away, showing no intention of following her upstairs. Flora clenched her fists, took a deep breath, and got out of the car. Before the car door closed, Flora's eyes suddenly reddened. "Bill, the wedding in 7 days will go on as planned, right? Men probably love those who show weakness the most." In the end, Bill followed Flora to her apartment. I sat on the car roof, watching their intimate tug-of-war. The summer night breeze couldn't warm my cold soul. Showing weakness, acting coy. These were the things Bill used to despise the most. I stared at their tightly clasped hands, forced to follow Bill into the elevator and all the way to Flora's apartment. After entering, Bill casually threw his suit jacket onto the sofa. Flora couldn't wait to wrap her arms around Bill's waist from behind. "Bill, I'm so scared." Scared? I was a bit surprised to look at Flora. Since knowing Flora, I had never heard her say the word scared. Bill turned around, his shirt collar pulled apart, revealing a large expanse of skin. Flora stood on tiptoe and kissed him. "What are you scared of?" Bill stroked her head, letting her hands do whatever they wanted. "I'm scared Eve will change her mind. I'm scared you'll suddenly leave me. I'm scared I'm not good enough for you." Bill chuckled, full of affection. "Don't worry, Eve won't change her mind." Chapter 3. Bill's certainty left me in a daze. Back when we were most in love, Bill was also this certain. He said, "No way, Bill, will never betray Eve in this lifetime." That day, I thought I would be happy forever. Bill and I were desk mates in junior high, attended the same high school, started dating in our first year of college, and later started a business together. 16 years. We got engaged when the company was on the right track. Barring any surprises, we were supposed to get married this year. But in the 16th year of our acquaintance, the 10th year of our love, Bill changed. When did Bill start to change? Maybe it was when he stopped sending me messages to check on me, maybe it was when he sat across from me, holding his phone, unable to suppress his smile, or maybe it was when he started sending Flora good morning and good night texts every day. True love is ever changing. So when we broke up, he took all the blame on himself and protected Flora very well. I granted his wish and didn't expose Flora's provocations towards me later. Actually, when Flora first appeared, I didn't think much of it. A partner's daughter who wanted to gain experience at our company. To secure that business deal, Bill came to seek my advice. He suggested that Flora should be assigned to the secretary's office, as company affairs weren't appropriate for her to handle. I believed him. But I didn't expect Bill to make Flora his personal secretary, a position she held for a year. Bill also went to great lengths to persuade me to go abroad to develop the market, where I stayed for another year. When I returned, Flora had become known as the future Bill's wife. And I had become Bill's ex-girlfriend. Before I could confront Bill, he came to me. He pushed a resignation letter in front of me, along with a share transfer agreement. Eve, we once said that if one day we met someone who moved our hearts more, we would part amicably. Do you remember? Chapter 4. When Bill and Flora rolled into the bedroom, I hid in the living room. How fortunate. I could still maintain a small distance from Bill, sparing myself from seeing those filthy, disgusting scenes firsthand. Even though Flora had already sent me videos and photos of them. Bill's phone was tossed in the living room, buzzing incessantly. I leaned in close, and the number displayed on the screen was mine. It felt like my mind exploded, and I stood there, stunned. My fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as scenes from my death played out frame by frame before my eyes. Terror, helplessness. I remember, my death was anything but dignified. After agreeing to Bill's breakup terms, I left the company. Flora found me, wanting to talk. What was there to talk about? I looked at her, and she sneered, "Aren't you curious why I chose Bill?" Why? I followed her words and asked. Flora took me to a nearby cafe. Originally, I just wanted to see how deep Bill's feelings for you were, but it turns out they weren't that strong. I didn't want to get entangled with her. But as soon as I stepped out, a few people grabbed me and shoved me into a van. The car jolted along, from the city to the outskirts, from day to night. Until the mountain wind howled, and thin branches scratched my exposed calves and arms. Did Flora send you? I forced myself to speak calmly. The four men in front of me looked emaciated, with sunken eyes and a peculiar foul smell emanating from them. They said nothing but pounced on me, taking advantage of the night to pin me to the ground and vent their desires, from night till day. In my desperate struggle, my head was struck, opening a wound. Blood flowed in streams, covering the ground. When I opened my eyes again, I stood behind Bill, watching him hold Flora's hand, announcing the wedding date. Counting the days, their wedding would be on my 7th day. Chapter 5. At 1 a.m, Bill came out, a towel wrapped around his lower body. He picked up his phone from the sofa, and upon seeing the missed call, his pupils contracted further. I curled up on the sofa, my body trembling, my mind filled with scenes from before my death. Flora's voice called out from the bedroom, "Bill, what's wrong?" Bill pressed down the corner of his eye, deleted the call log, and walked towards Flora, pulling her into his arms. The smooth way he deleted the records was exactly like the time when I rarely returned home to see him after going abroad. Back then, Bill would always video call me. He would complain about how much work there was in wine, saying how much better it would be if I were by his side. I responded to him while handling documents. "You don't like it when I act cute, so why are you doing it now? Why are you whining like that?" I thought I was just teasing him casually, but I didn't expect his face to turn pale in an instant. Only later did I realize. When two people have been together for a long time, their way of speaking unconsciously becomes more and more alike. The next morning, Bill left Flora's apartment. Before leaving, he gently placed a kiss on Flora's face. "Sleep in a bit longer, you don't need to go to the office today." I found it somewhat amusing. In the past, Bill was always strict about time. No matter the weather, he would drag me out of bed, afraid I might delay the day's work. Even during dates, he wouldn't wait an extra minute for me. 16 years, and I had gotten used to the habits he made me accustomed to. But it turned out, all of his habits could be broken, and the exception would only be made for a specific person. Chapter 6. I followed Bill to the office. My assistant of 3 years was anxiously holding a contract, pacing in front of Bill's office. When she saw Bill, she quickly spoke up, "President Bill, there was a problem with the contract Eve negotiated a few days ago." The other party insists on meeting with Eve before they will sign. Bill glanced at the assistant, seemingly not too concerned, and said matter-of-factly, "Then call Eve, she'll come over." The assistant looked awkwardly at Bill, and the phone in her hand kept ringing with no answer. Perhaps it was the numerous unanswered calls that made Bill's frown deepen, and he slammed the contract he was reading onto the table. "How long have you been calling?" "You've been trying since this morning with no success." Bill's gaze fell on the little assistant standing by, and the words impatient were written all over his face. The assistant shrank her shoulders. "Yes, President Bill." I stood by the table, a bit surprised that my phone wasn't reachable. Clearly, last night, my phone had made a call to Bill's. Bill must think I'm doing this on purpose. I pressed my lips together in a self-deprecating smile, boredly scanning the scattered contracts on the table. The terms in the contract had been altered significantly. They were nothing like the conditions I had initially negotiated. Flora's handiwork. After all, she had taken over my position. Bill remained silent for a long time, his eyes fixed on his phone screen. The screen displayed our chat history, and 2 minutes ago, he had sent me a message, "Call me back immediately." Bill clenched his jaw, his anger brewing, ready to explode at any moment. Just then, his good friend Alex called him. "Bill, Eve, she." "Eve isn't at the office." "I'm looking for her too. If you get in touch with her, tell her to come to the office as soon as possible." Chapter 7. Bill interrupted Alex's words. Without waiting for a response on the other end, Bill hastily hung up the phone and walked into the conference room. I was pulled along by Bill's urgent steps, but a faint, elusive dull pain radiated from my chest. Bill ended the call so quickly. I was dying to know what Alex wanted to say next, but I couldn't find out. The conference room was eerily silent. I had negotiated that deal for almost half a month, and just as it was finalized, Bill had broken up with me. Many people said Bill had used me and then discarded me. Now, the mill had stopped turning. When Alex arrived at the office, Bill was in a fit of rage. "Without Eve, the company can't function. A whole team of people can't measure up to one Eve." Alex's hand froze in midair as he was about to knock on the door. He hesitated at the entrance for a dozen seconds but eventually rushed in. Trailing behind him was Flora. "Bill, what's going on?" Flora spoke up before Alex could. Bill turned around, his gaze passing through me and landing directly on Flora, completely ignoring Alex standing nearby. "Take a look at this contract." "What's going on?" Radiant Unity Limited suddenly backed out. They said they need to see Eve before signing. A fleeting, hard-to-catch expression flashed in Flora's eyes. She took the contract from Bill's hand and flipped through it repeatedly. Could it be that Eve is playing tricks? After all. Flora deliberately left her sentence unfinished, but it seemed everyone understood and appeared to have an epiphany. Only Alex clenched his fists tightly. Bill tacitly accepted Flora's words. He simply said, "Meeting adjourned," leaving Flora alone in the conference room. After everyone left, Alex rushed forward and grabbed Bill by the collar. "Bill, you bastard. Eve is dead. Dead. And you can't even bother to collect her body? This is the company she founded with her own hands. You kicked her out, let people slander her. Bill, are you even human?" Chapter 8. Alex threw Bill to the ground by his collar. He came in troubled, and left in a fury. I wanted to catch up and stop him, ask him how he knew I was dead, and also ask why he, who used to dislike me, had come to find Bill. Bill's head hit the edge of the table, causing Flora to repeatedly cry out for help in panic. When Alex mentioned that I had died, Flora was shocked. It seemed she didn't know. Bill, on the other hand, clearly didn't believe it. I understood. After all, Bill knew that I had always been careful with my life. In my 3rd year of college, my parents died in a car accident, and my grandmother, who was in the hospital, had a heart attack upon hearing the news. In one night, I lost the closest people to me. I became fragile and helpless. It was Bill who pulled me out of the depths of despair. He told me I still had him. So, I had to take good care of myself. After that, I became extremely cautious about my life. After briefly tending to the wound on his head, Bill buried himself in work again. It was as if the news of my death was just a joke to him, even though it came from his best friend's mouth. He didn't take it seriously. Bill took over the deal with Radiant Unity Limited himself and went to negotiate with them in person. I followed him once again into Radiant Unity Limited's office building. Surprisingly, Flora, who usually clung to Bill, didn't come along. This time, Vice President Lou of Radiant Unity Limited greeted Bill. His gaze thoughtfully swept behind Bill. Eve didn't come. The smile on Bill's face faded, and his tone became distant. Vice President Lou, I am the person in charge of Star Growth Corporation. The words person in charge of Star Growth Corporation were like a wake-up call that snapped me back to reality. That time, when Bill sent me abroad to expand the business, he said, Eve, I really don't want you to work so hard. Star Growth Corporation has me, and that's enough. After this business expansion, you should take a good rest. His last words, I'll take care of you, were drowned out by the bustling crowd at the airport that night. Chapter 9. Bill ultimately conceded an additional 5% profit. After signing the deal, he visibly breathed a sigh of relief. Alex sent him an address, the funeral home. Bill frowned and forcefully tapped the screen. Alex, this act is going too far. Ridiculous. Why would he think Alex would be willing to play along? Alex was his best friend, someone he had grown up with. Probably because Alex disliked me, whenever Bill and I appeared together, Alex was nowhere to be seen. That was until the night before Bill and I got engaged. Alex was dead drunk. He grabbed my arm and solemnly placed my hand over Bill's. He cursed and swore, and finally said, if you ever treat him badly, I'll kill you. I nodded earnestly. How could I not treat Bill well? I had given almost everything to Bill. Even Star Growth Corporation was saved from a financial crisis with the insurance money I received after my parents' accident. That day, Bill also drank a lot. He stood in front of me with Alex, Carl, and Daniel, laughing heartily. As if he had found the greatest treasure in the world. Every word he said that day was serious. He told his brothers that if his bride wasn't me, they shouldn't attend his wedding. Youthful promises, how many of them can truly be remembered? Bill tossed his phone onto the passenger seat. At the top of the screen, Alex's status repeatedly showed typing, but nothing was sent. Yet, an inexplicable pain tore at my chest, as if my soul was being scorched, and my consciousness began to blur. I thought, I'm finally leaving, aren't I? In truth, there's nothing left that I can't let go of. Chapter 10. When I regained consciousness, it was around 3 a.m. one day. It seemed like I had taken a nap. In the dream, everything was hazy. Someone was crying quietly, and when their tears hit my palm, it was so hot that I trembled all over. When I opened my eyes again, I only saw Bill, repeatedly adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. There was a smile on his face. The photographer followed Bill's every move, camera in hand. I looked around. In this familiar room, there were now big red double happiness paper cutouts on the glass windows. A heart marked today's date on the calendar next to the dressing table. It turned out that today was Bill and Flora's wedding day. And their bridal room was the one I personally designed and renovated 3 years ago. Do you think there will be traffic today? I'm worried we'll be late. Bill's voice pulled me back to reality. He was rubbing his hands, looking a bit nervous. I turned my head and saw Bill's parents walking out of another room. Their hair had turned grayer, but maybe because they were overjoyed by the wedding, both elderly faces were full of smiles. You've always been impatient since you were a child. It's only because Eve had a good temper that she was willing to endure hardships with you. Bill's mother busied herself with arranging the red dates and lotus seeds on the wedding bed, seemingly unaware of the trace of awkwardness that flashed across Bill's face. Bill's father's smile faded, and his face fell. His eyes were hard to read, shifting between light and dark as he stopped Bill's mother and led her back into the inner room. Bill didn't explain anything, instead coaxing and comforting his mother. I didn't follow them into the room, but I could still hear the sound of the father and son arguing. Fragments of my name came up once again. When I moved closer, I heard Bill's father speak in a steady voice, revealing that Bill's mother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's last year. When Bill left the room, his expression wasn't good. He took out his phone to call someone, but the call never connected. Until the photographer urged, "It's time to go, groom." Chapter 11. Over 10 black Maybach lined up neatly as they exited the neighborhood, making quite a grand scene. I drifted atop one of the cars, gazing absent-mindedly at the slowly brightening sky. I didn't know how long I would continue following Bill, but I noticed that I no longer felt any pain. Bill sat in the wedding car, continuously dialing a number, his fingers growing more anxious with each unanswered ring. Even when the car stopped in front of the hotel, he was still clutching his phone. His knuckles turned white from the pressure. It wasn't until several groomsmen reminded him that he hurriedly grabbed the bouquet and got out of the car. Only then did I notice that the groomsmen were unfamiliar faces. His 3 good brothers were nowhere to be seen. Amidst the lively cheers behind me, Bill pulled me along to Flora's suite. The red carpet stretched from the door of the suite. When someone spotted Bill, they shouted, "The groom is here." The traditional wedding customs were complicated. But Bill was always generous, throwing out red envelopes like confetti. Even the games were cleared thanks to his financial prowess. When Bill finally picked up Flora, thunderous applause erupted. I stood as far away from Bill as possible, my gaze falling on several black cars parked far, far away below the hotel. After the tea ceremony, Flora's father gave Bill a long, deep look. Bill snapped back to reality, quickly regaining his composure as he carried Flora downstairs. According to the photographer, they were actually ahead of schedule. Everyone said it was because Bill was too eager to get married. As the cars began the return journey, I stayed atop the farthest one, feeling a growing unease. It wasn't until the cars passed through the tree-lined road that we had to take to return to the bridal chamber that my unease intensified. Suddenly, all the cars came to a stop. I looked ahead. On the opposite side of the road, a row of black Maybach had also stopped. The hood of the first car was covered in yellow and white chrysanthemums, roses, and lilies. It was a funeral procession. Chapter 12. Red and white collided. Bill's already tense expression grew even darker. But not a single person got out of the cars on the other side. The 2 groups remained in a stalemate. My heart pounded like a drum, urging me toward the funeral procession. Through the tinted rear windows, I faintly saw a few familiar faces and someone holding my photo. I stood there, stunned. This tree-lined road was never part of the usual funeral route. Unless the driver did it on purpose. The heart I thought could no longer feel pain now felt as if it had been stabbed with a sharp knife, each twist unbearable. Flora, her eyes red, tugged at Bill's sleeve. "Bill. I'm scared." Bill had no choice but to get out of the car. The rear window of the other car didn't roll down, but the driver casually tossed out a phrase through the gap, "The dead should be respected." In the end, it was Bill's side that gave way. The funeral procession roared past, and I wanted to chase after it, but I couldn't leave Bill even for a moment. Bill and Flora really missed the timing. Back in the bridal suite, Flora didn't see Bill's parents either. But she didn't seem to care and instead called a makeup artist to touch up her makeup. The group hurriedly followed the motorcade back to the wedding venue. Bill had booked an estate, and a large lawn was adorned with a beautifully romantic wedding stage. It felt like stepping into a fairy tale. But I had no time to appreciate it, my mind was filled with the image of that man holding my photo. Alex. The man who never liked me, now unshaven and with bloodshot eyes. I died, and he seemed very sad. Chapter 13. The wedding, initially scheduled for 11:58, was delayed until 12:18. Bill finally got married. He slid the ring onto Flora's finger and solemnly vowed to be with her for the rest of his life. On the screen, videos of Bill and Flora's past memories played on a loop. According to the host, Bill had personally edited the video. Flora smiled radiantly. But I found it all very dull. I was the one who taught Bill how to edit videos. Back in college, Bill suddenly fell in love with photography. He started his own social media account, and I stayed up all night learning how to edit videos. Later, when we earned our first income from social media, he got interested and asked me to teach him. During the banquet, Flora kept glancing at the door of the hall. She seemed to be waiting for someone. Whenever Bill had a moment, he was on the phone. By the end of the wedding, the person Flora was waiting for still hadn't shown up, and Bill's call hadn't gone through. After the wedding, Flora's father exchanged a few words with Bill, but his final comment was about Alex. "I didn't see Alex today. I heard from Flora that you two have been friends for over a decade. I expected to see him here today." Bill's hand, hanging by his side, tightened slightly. Not just Alex, 3 other close friends of his didn't come either. In fact, they were all in that Maybach hearse. My eyes suddenly stung. I remembered Bill once saying that if I wasn't his bride, his friends shouldn't attend the wedding. That youthful promise, his friends kept it for him. But he didn't. Chapter 14. Bill finally got through to Alex the next morning. Alex didn't say much. He sent Bill a location and specifically instructed, "Don't bring Flora. None of us want to see her." Bill had his phone on speaker. Alex's words fell clearly into Flora's ears. Her eyes reddened instantly, tears welling up, but not falling. Bill grabbed his jacket and rushed out the door. Before leaving, he wiped away Flora's unshed tears with his thumb. "Be good, wait for me at home." The car sped down the road. Alex and the others were waiting by the roadside. The air around me felt increasingly cold, even though it was 38 degrees Celsius today. In the desolate wilderness, there wasn't a soul in sight. Cigarette butts littered the ground by Alex's feet, and he was still holding half a cigarette. When Carl and Daniel saw Bill, they both turned their heads in another direction. Bill parked the car and walked up to Alex. Before he could say anything, Alex punched him hard, forcing his mouth shut, and blood flowed from his nose and mouth. I was so frightened that I backed away. Alex was notorious for his temper. Not only was he good with computers, but he was also skilled in Muay Thai. Bill's face turned away from the blow, anger boiling in his eyes. "Alex, what the hell is wrong with you? I haven't even asked why you didn't come to my wedding yesterday, and now you've dragged me out to this godforsaken place. What's your deal?" Alex shook his fist and grabbed Bill by the collar, dragging him up the mountain. The deeper they went, the colder the wind grew. The rustling leaves sounded like a deathly requiem. I finally remembered, this was where my accident happened. I must have died here. When Alex stopped, he kicked Bill to the ground and questioned him harshly. "Bill, the person who betrays true love deserves to die. But why was it Eve who died?" Chapter 15. The parched ground still bore untreated traces of blood. Bill tried to prop himself up, but his hands gave way, and he fell back down. He turned around in shock and looked at Alex, stammering for a while before finally speaking. "You said Eve is dead?" Alex remained silent, but his gaze was chilling, colder than one would look at a dead person. Carl and Daniel nodded silently, though the sound of their fists clenching tightly echoed loudly. Bill still didn't believe it. After laughing a few times, he looked around, suddenly shouting, "Eve, come out. I know you're here. You're all teaming up to fool me, right?" Like a madman. Suddenly, his gaze landed on the bushes. Following his eyes, I saw the pearl earring he had given me during our engagement. It had fallen there. Bill rushed over. He dug out the earring from the bushes, and there was still some bloodstain on it. Perhaps he had finally accepted the news of my death. The air had never been as quiet as it was now. Bill sat from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., not saying a word. Alex smoked one cigarette after another. The midday sun was dizzying, and I retreated into the shade of the trees. When Bill stood up again, he was too weak to stand steady, his hands trembling even more than when he had taken Flora's hand at the wedding yesterday. Alex ground his cigarette butt under his foot, twisting it repeatedly. Finally, Alex lifted his gaze slightly and gave Bill a cold look. "Bill, our brotherhood ends here. If we meet again, we're enemies, not friends." Chapter 16. Bill was the only one among the 4 of them without any background. Back in school, Bill became close to them because of his good grades and high emotional intelligence. From middle school to high school to university, Alex and I were always at the same school. Carl and Daniel chose to study abroad, and by the time they returned, Bill and I had already confirmed our relationship. Since starting our business, they actually helped us quite a bit. The growth of Star Growth Corporation couldn't have happened without the support of the 3 of them behind the scenes. But now, it seemed like the 4 of them were drifting apart. 16 years together. In the end, we all drifted apart. Bill stayed on the mountain for a long time. From sunset to moonrise, the mountain wind brushed past his ears, chilling me to the bone. When Bill answered his father's call, his voice was a bit hoarse. "Dad, I'm still trying to figure out a way for Mom's illness. Asking Daniel for help isn't something I want to keep doing." Leaning against the tree trunk, I straightened up slightly. Last year was my toughest year abroad. I could only occasionally find time each month to video call them. Through the screen, I didn't notice anything unusual with Bill's mom. And that year, Bill and Flora were going strong. It wasn't until yesterday that he found out about his mother's condition. Bill's father was silent for a moment before responding. "Last year, Alex and Daniel came to visit us. You don't need to worry about us anymore. Who you choose is none of our concern, but your mother and I want to tell you, some people, once you miss them, they're gone forever. As an adult, don't regret your choices." Seeing Bill's back bow under his father's words, my tears could no longer be held back, they streamed down uncontrollably. Yes. An adult. Don't regret your choices. Chapter 17. Bill returned to the bridal suite late at night. Flora's calls came one after another, and Bill was getting impatient. I seemed to see the way he used to ignore my calls. Bill drove even faster than he did before. The roar of the engine couldn't drown out his agonized screams. But someone had already told him, "Don't regret your choices." Seeing him like this now, I couldn't help but look down on him a little. Flora was waiting at the villa entrance. The car's headlights shone on her thin frame, like a delicate white flower swaying in the wind. Seeing that Bill didn't look well, she didn't seem as anxious as she had sounded on the phone. Instead, she spoke softly, "Honey, you're back." Bill suppressed his emotions and pushed open the door. What greeted him was a room in utter disarray. All the decorative paintings I had painstakingly collected, with significant sentimental value, were piled on the floor, many of the frames broken. Shards of vases were scattered everywhere, as if someone had just vented their anger. Bill frowned, his tone indifferent. "You had someone tear it apart." Flora clung to Bill's hand, swinging it back and forth. "You promised me before, didn't you? I get to decide on the renovation of the bridal suite. I don't like the current style." Bill pondered for a moment but ultimately said nothing. While Bill was in the shower, Flora ordered people to throw out all the dismantled items. She snapped a photo and, in a gloating manner, sent me a message. "I've torn all of it down. Out with the old, in with the new." Indeed, Flora still didn't know that I was dead. The next second, Flora's phone chimed. She smirked and unlocked the screen. A blood-soaked photo popped up. Flora screamed and threw her phone, but even on the distant screen, that bloody image wouldn't disappear. Chapter 18. Bill checked Flora's phone. The final conclusion was that it must have been infected with a virus, and changing the phone should solve the problem. After Flora fell asleep, Bill took the phone to the study. Under the dim yellow light, Bill stood by the window, his emotions unreadable. He pulled up his call records and found the landline number that had been calling him repeatedly, buried in the blacklist. After some searching, he realized it was a call from the police station. That was why Alex had barged into the meeting room that day, questioning him, asking why he wouldn't even come to collect the body. Bill called the number back. When the phone was answered, the officer on the other end hesitated for a long time. Upon hearing that it was a homicide case and that the suspect had already been arrested, Bill's expression turned particularly grim. After hanging up, he immediately dialed Alex's number. Alex picked up quickly, as if he had been waiting by the phone. Bill gritted his teeth. "Was it you who sent Flora that picture?" "Alex, even if Eve is dead, you can't take out your anger on Flora." Alex chuckled lowly on the other end of the line. "Do no wrong, fear no ghosts." "Bill, what are you so afraid of? Could it be that Eve's death has something to do with you?" Bill was so enraged by Alex that his face flushed red, his furious voice reverberating through the entire study. "Alex, do you think you're any better? Wasn't it you who brought Flora to me? You secretly liked Eve for over a decade, Alex, dare you admit that? In order to take Eve away from me, you set me up. You can't escape responsibility for her death." Chapter 19. In fact, Bill had changed a lot. He used to never shift responsibility onto others so casually. But now, he was blaming Alex for my death without a second thought. His words to me were like a pebble tossed into the vast ocean, unable to stir even the slightest ripple. Because Flora wasn't brought to Bill by Alex. To be precise, it might have been me. To secure more deals and take the company further, I rarely reached out to Alex for help. But Alex did help me make connections. That day, Flora's father brought her along to the restaurant. Later, I handed the deal over to Bill to follow up on. That's how Flora ended up interning at our company. As for the setup Bill mentioned, I think Alex would disdain such tactics. A man so direct and hot-tempered, the phrase I heard most from him was just beat them up. Just like how he punched Bill in the face earlier today. For some reason, I suddenly remembered my first meeting with Alex. On the day of middle school registration, Alex and I were both late. Embarrassed, I was infected by his bright smile as he said, "It's not like the sky is falling, so don't cry." Back then, I thought Alex was quite easygoing. Good-looking and optimistic. Later, I saw him cornering a student in a school uniform in an alley, punching and kicking him. After that, I started avoiding him. It wasn't until my desk mate, who turned out to be Bill, started calling him brother that I learned his name was Alex. Chapter 20. Bill called Carl and Daniel, wanting to know if Flora had anything to do with my death. Both of them kept their mouths shut. But I discovered that I could finally leave. I drifted away from Bill's side in a daze. Wandering the dimly lit streets, I didn't know where to go or who to find. An old man was pedaling his tricycle with great effort. On the tricycle were my most prized collection of paintings. Tattered and broken, they resembled my current state. I followed the old man, keeping a safe distance. Worried that my cold presence might make him sick, yet curious about what he would do with those paintings. The old man stopped by the roadside, panting heavily. A familiar Maybach slowly pulled up beside him. When Alex stepped out of the car, I felt a jolt of fear. Bill's words echoed in my mind. Alex had secretly liked me for 10 years. Alex carefully loaded the paintings into the car, gave the old man some money and a cup of warm water, prompting the old man to repeatedly express his gratitude. I lost interest in my own death. But I still chose to follow Alex, thinking he might take me to see where I was buried, and maybe then I could completely disappear. Alex didn't disappoint me. He walked into the cemetery late at night, carrying a pack of beer. I followed closely behind, scared yet unable to stay away. My grave had a great location. Alex must have spent a lot of money. He even arranged the funeral. I should probably thank him. Alex drank deeply, tears falling like broken beads onto the ground. Eve, if only you weren't afraid of me. If only the person you liked was me. Chapter 21. Alex's declaration of being neither friend nor foe quickly became evident. He cut all ties with Star Growth Corporation and made harsh statements within the circle. No one dared to collaborate with Star Growth Corporation because no one wanted to cross Alex. Bill was overwhelmed, but it was futile. The efforts we put into our work were ultimately in vain. When Bill cornered Alex in the office, Carl and Daniel rushed over. Bill reached out his hand toward Alex. "Give me Eve's phone." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Why should I?" Bill was so angry he choked, throwing the messy photos onto the floor. These photos, they were all from Eve's phone, right? She already knew about Flora and me. She knew I would break up with her when she came back this time, didn't she? Bill spoke slowly, as if torturing himself with every word. 3 days ago, Alex had sent Bill a stack of photos. I had watched Alex print them out with my own eyes. Photos Flora had sent me. Along with our chat logs, filled with the taunts, boasts, and ridicule of a young woman who had successfully stolen someone else's love. 16 years, and you never really understood who Eve was. She chose you because she liked you, she loved you. But you didn't deserve her love. Alex threw Bill out. And before kicking him out, Alex gave him another beating. Carl and Daniel awkwardly rubbed their noses, pretending they hadn't seen anything. In truth, I had already learned the truth about my death. It was just an accident. 4 addicts, deeply in debt, banded together out of desperation, looking for one big score. A crime of passion. I was just unlucky. And Alex, he just couldn't stand to see Bill doing well. Chapter 22. It's strange. I've been trapped by Bill again. Closer than before, making it even harder to escape. When Bill threw the photos in front of Flora, she flinched, trying to explain. She seemed unprepared for the fact that the person she had so carefully chosen was now angrily lashing out at her with a mask of hatred. If you hadn't asked Eve to meet at the cafe that day, she wouldn't have had the accident. If it weren't for you, I would have married Eve. Bill demanded to know why Flora sent me those things, all the while murmuring about how heartbroken Eve must have been. I tugged at the corners of my lips. Whether I was heartbroken or not, it's all in the past now. But being trapped here, watching him pretend to be deeply remorseful, is truly heartbreaking. Flora was probably enraged by Bill's words. She stood up, grabbed a photo frame from the table, and hurled it at Bill. Bill, what kind of man are you? Even if I was the one who seduced you first, you didn't have to take the bait. Alex could refuse me, why couldn't you? Don't act like a saint after being a hypocrite with me. I chose you only because I couldn't reach your 3 friends status, otherwise, why would I even look at you? Divorce, I want a divorce right now. Bill wouldn't agree to a divorce. During the days I was trapped by him, I realized that Bill had already become the self-serving person we once despised. He chose Flora because her family's company was far more beneficial to him than I ever was. Now, Bill wished I was still alive, just so I could help him solve his problems, nothing more. If I hadn't died, he would have been the biggest beneficiary. As the arguments continued, Flora became mentally unstable under Bill's torment. Flora's father visited him a few times, always trying to persuade him kindly. Life will get better as time goes on, and look, Star Growth Corporation is back on track. The future will be filled with blessings for you. Chapter 23. Star Growth Corporation did indeed get back on track. But that was only because Bill made a deal with Alex. This surprised me. Bill traded shares of Star Growth Corporation, which had long lost their value, in exchange for the location of my grave. Star Growth Corporation changed hands. Yet Bill never found my grave. Alex kept my legacy intact and also played a trick on Bill. He found someone with the same name as me to go and pay respects. As Bill stood by the gravestone, gritting his teeth, I saw Alex and Carl standing far off, mocking him. Belated love is worth less than grass. But they mocked the wrong thing. Bill didn't have belated love. He just couldn't get past his own guilt, nor could he bear to witness the decline and downfall of Star Growth Corporation. He no longer loved me. That was the truth. Later, Bill searched every cemetery he could find, but still couldn't locate it. I felt a bit relieved. My gravestone could remain clean and untouched. And I finally broke free from Bill's hold when Flora's pregnancy could no longer be hidden. Flora was pregnant. The child wasn't Bill's. When Bill heard the news, he reacted with indifference. He gave Flora some money and let her choose to either abort the child or get a divorce. Flora took the money, signed the divorce papers, and tried to leave that very night. Because she knew that her life with Bill wouldn't get any better. Bill snapped. He kept repeating, if Eve were here, he wouldn't be like this. Bill truly lost his mind. He grabbed a knife and stormed into the bedroom, cornering Flora. He stabbed her again and again without any hesitation. Then he grasped Flora's hand and plunged the knife into his own body. Before I could even react, I was splattered with blood and finally freed. Chapter 24. Alex buried me beside my parents. Bill never figured it out. Because he no longer cared. When I returned to my gravestone, my parents were standing in a soft glow, as if they had been waiting for me for a long time. They said they were here to take me home. Behind them, Grandma was leaning on her cane, waving at me. Before I left, I made 2 selfish wishes in this world. I wished that Bill and Flora would torment each other until their old age. I wished that Alex would be forever happy and joyful,